Ostinato has a pivotal meaning in music for centuries. When a composer writes an ostinato, it's always criticized because it's identifying with a certain character of music. And this identification is also a lock by itself. Any system in music, in terms of language style system, is whole tone scale by Debussy, pentatonic scale in Asia, octotonic scale in the early 20th century. As soon as you hear them, you identify them and they lock you in. Augmented second in the top tetrachord of a harmonic minor with Arabian music. Melodically, not harmonically as the harmonic minor scale in harmony. But nevertheless, these are identifiers. Equally so, the minimalism is identifying right away when you use a pattern of few notes that you play with in different order and in a certain pace. You get into a mesmerizing atmosphere. So, ostinato, held or repeated, pulsed or suspended, grounded or superimposed, as a matter of fact, gives a certain sense of stagnance in the musical motion. After all, the melody or the melodies, the harmonies, the coating of the texture, the layered or vertical organization of the sounds are all going from one point to another. And therefore, when you reach the point, like in a syntax, you have eventually the comma. So you have to have made some kind of meaningful statement, perhaps not explicitly, perhaps purposely left to wander about, but you have arranged a certain order of words in order to provoke in the reader, listener, co-thinker, or to whom you address these few signs of a written document that reaches them at different levels that they in fact absorb, react, reject, accept, half accept, puzzled, disagree, but nevertheless receive. And so in order to be eloquent in your presentation, you need to nail the point of what you want to say. Perhaps it's not novelty. Perhaps many other people have made this statement or the purpose of it, but it's the way it's received which then brings a certain convergence between the purpose and the reception of it. And I find that in the eloquence of a musical statement through gestures of intervals, through movements of delay resolutions, if there were, for instance, the very concept of consonance, dissonance, in other words, tension and release, based on the Western European harmonic language, the various layers of delayed resolutions brings you to create a mood that is suggestive of unsettlement, of longing, of expectation, of suspenseful delay of the resolution that you're bringing ultimately, or not, but you enter in you create an atmosphere. And the ostinato seems to be the pattern that has everything else oscillate around it. The melodic or the thematic or the just pattern of notes, if not so thematic, motivic, whichever way you want to call them, something you might recognize as a reader, as a listener, pivots around a central note, and therefore this tone, bass, middle, or top in the range, defines the space which you're going to pivot around until you move to another note. And that is so specific to the Russian Orthodox Church, where organs or any instruments of music are not allowed, and the worship is based on singing, mostly four parts. And there is one fifth part that holds the bass sound. Usually a basso sings it and holds it next to a pillar where it's resonant in the church. So it gives the ground on which you build those four-part singing. Bach in his organ works very often uses this very long organ pedal bass point, which hold and on which you build a lot of arpeggios, chords, polyphony, patterns that interact. You modulate, you go to different degrees, but this always stays down until he moves it to another note. He does that either at the cadence, before or after the stretto, before the final tonic, the dominant pedal, harmonically speaking, or he does it specifically as an opener on which you develop a rhetorical amount of notes which tell so many stories, narrate so many patterns, rise and drop, combine and overlap, two or three of them with the manuals while the foot holds that bass. If it's repeated and pulsed, like in pop music, like drums, like perhaps if it's uneven rhythm, more reminiscent of the pulse of the heart, pum pum, pum pum, or just pum 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 pum, rather than ta. Why do I think that many times this signature of the music language, that is the ostinato, is considered an easy way to not move the bass line melodically? In other words, let the whole musical structure, all the musical texture, all the musical elements that are constitutive of your statement, regardless what type they are, be in constant motion, going from point A to B to C to D, etc. instead of having something that grounds it or something on which you suspend it, that comes recurrently or stays or is repeated, because the recurrence also is part of the embedded ostinato in patterns where you return to the first note even if you escape from it to return to it. Like Bach does it even a lot in the second partita. Regardless, if it's embedded or if it's outstanding, if it's pulsing, if it's rhythmed, if it's only something that you feel needs harmonic soothing, a harmonic solace. Take, for instance, the second movement of the Tchaikovsky Violin Concerto. Re, sol, la, si, do, re, sol, fa, re. The melody is so especially sad and driving pattern of octave and above and down. And then the harmony is obviously tonic dominant, but the tonic remains on the bottom very softly. It's not demonstratively loud, but it's there. And so you play the dominant on the tonic, then you play the tonic, the dominant over the tonic, then the tonic. So it's sort of a half dominant. It's not a full dominant where you feel like you have the famous perfect fifth movement motion of the circle of fifths. And the leading tone is no more embedded so much in the dominant there. It's more about, because the leading tone, in fact, in the melody drops instead of rising. Da, 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 instead of da, dee, da. So it's more a hint of a dominant on the tonic layer. It's almost like a sandwich with layers. Wasn't a very poetic analogy. I personally love ostinatos because they bring a certain grounding when you want to elevate yourself above. It's almost as if you extend the musical being between the spiritual elevation to the highest and then at the same time have your feet grounded in the earth, so you're really human, but you also can think outside of your condition. It's almost a stretch in a certain philosophical way between our condition, mortality, and our thinking for above and beyond our time. And also is because I think that an ostinato, when it's in the bass, creates incredible combination of bittersweet, tender, minor, major, sort of in between moods in the harmonic clashes, tender clashes if you want, with the bass note that is held. There are dissonances, but not really so, because there is one of the voices that doesn't move. It's not contrapoint. It's a still motion, no motion, and the other movements of notes move around it, above it or under it, or mostly above it if it's in the bass, that it's held. And I find that the colorful harmonic combinations are very tender and special. Of course, that is on the level of the harmonies, moods, atmospherically. But if you take it in terms of character of music, and you take the opening of the First Symphony by Brahms, which was nicknamed by the reviewers in his time as Beethoven's 10th, so much they tried to find something to say. Always critics have to find something to say that they understand, what in fact doesn't matter. Brahms is Brahms, Beethoven is Beethoven. That we know today. But anyway, in his time, his opener of the symphony was with a C or Do, ostinato, a dostinato. That's kind of a silly thing to say. But there is forceful because it's played by the double basses and it's repeated, and there is the timpani, and you feel like it's nailed emotionally, like some kind of knock, as they say for Beethoven's fifth opening three notes, which are not an ostinato, because I don't think they are long enough repeated to be one. But regardless, perhaps at the recap when he multiplies them. But anyway, the point is that it's the knock of destiny. It could be also a woodpecker knocking on the wood. It could be a statement of a syllable that you repeat repeatedly because somehow you cannot even make a sentence out of your anger, rage, or desire to express your outrage. There is something very powerful about that repeated note. When there are, in Christian tradition of the 18th century, the bells of the churches were doing that kind of pulsing bell sound when they were announcing the death of a member of the community, of the village, of the area. And so, by analogy in music making, like in Mozart's Quartet K421 or in Bach Cantata number 8, Liebster Gott, wann werde ich sterben, you have repeated notes that come anguished or announcing as a signal of death in the symbolism of sound painting, if you want. But it's in the higher notes. It's not in the lower notes. And so there is a symbolism of the repeated note for its echo of the bell announcing, the toll of the bell announcing the death of somebody. And if you don't know that, then you don't catch that symbolism and you just hear repeated notes. When Beethoven repeats notes, often it's instead of a melodic group of notes. I speak 3 or 4. Of course, when he does the opening of Waldstein Sonata, you have the theme, the melody, the pulse, all in one single chord of C major repeated many times. So is it an ostinato, or is it ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta instead of ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta? The insistence of the repeated note in Beethoven comes in many places of his music, but not necessarily always as an ostinato. In my sense, an ostinato is some longer time that is longer than a pattern of few repeated notes, for instance. In the Kreutzer Sonata, or the G major Bach fugue, re sol for organ, sol 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 fa mi fa, re si 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 la sol la. It could be re mi fa sol la sol fa mi fa. Could have been, and it would have been neighboring tones, and it could have been step motion, but by repeating the note, each note has a different function until the final one is the appoggiatura to the downbeats leading tone. Re, sol, 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 fa sharp, leading tone, mi, fa, re, si, si. So there is a repetitivity in short group of notes gives a sense of drive, like in the opening of the Waldstein, mi, 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 fa, fa, sol. And Beethoven uses often repeated notes melodically, harmonically, thematically, transitionally, mostly because I think they're striking, literally, meaning the not only your instruments and the sounds, but they're striking the attention. Like when he does, as I said earlier, in the Fifth Symphony recap, you have so 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 mi. He could have done a scale, he could have done an arpeggio, he could have done any other tones before the three sol 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 mi of the recap. So the sense of ostinato, I think, is not only a settled harmonic static feel of music produced, it's also a driven insistence that is instead of a melodic note. For instance, Chopin uses it often, like in the D flat major nocturne, or the F minor etude. Da, 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 da. I think that the repeated note, it's almost, when it's loud or intense or driven, it's almost a scream where you syllabically, in music translated notes, nail down a thought. I don't want to do, or something. You feel like any other pattern would be soothing, especially if it's step motion, but it could be leaps, could be dissonant leaps of intervals like augmented, diminished fifth or fourth. Then it would be more erratic. So composers choose and use probably the repeated note, the held note, the single note, suspended in the middle or on the bottom, is a tool to express either a longing, either a deception, either a tension build-up until a delayed resolution. Embedding it or separating it in terms of space. In the case of Brahms' First Symphony, between the highest notes of the orchestra rising chromatically, do, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, si, slowly rising, the bass staying on the ostinato do, you feel like there is a build-up of slow stretch of intensity until it, like a rope that will break, another of my cheap analogies. But the fact is that it's used at different levels for different tensions, for different speed of release. And when often a composer writes one and the teacher tells him or her, you know, you could do something more creative than an ostinato, keep moving your bass line, if it's in the bass, think contrapunctically, think polyphonically, think in motion, in layers of motions. But I still think that character matters a lot in music. And if it's by itself or as a reflection of something else, like I would say a film storytelling or a theater play or a video game or any narrative situation where in fact the music is the psychological layer that is suggestive to you, watching and listening to the dialogues and watching the images and understanding the storytelling or not, or purposely being in an expectation placed so by the people who write the script, film the film, organize the game. You feel like the music is enhancing these moods, as if to suggest to you something creepy is going to come up or something needs a resolution because we are at the edge of the tension. But if you don't have image or text, sung, spoken, or any image, and you just hear pure music in the sense of sounds, then their own gestures, intervals, and combinations, and therefore ostinato, speak volumes about what they want the listener or the reader, if you read the music, to experience as an inner psychological storytelling. So you see, you can take a pattern of part of the toolkit of composers, that is the ostinato, and adapt it to so many situations of storytelling. Thank you.